The warm spring afternoon felt like any other day as Amara Johnson drove home from her job at the community health clinic. The windows were down just enough to let in the fresh air, and she hummed along to the radio playing softly in the background. She had promised to bring dinner to her parents' house tonight, her father's favorite pasta dish that only she seemed to make just right. Glancing in her rearview mirror, she noticed police lights flashing behind her. Her stomach tightened slightly, the way it always did around police, but she took a deep breath. She had done nothing wrong. Just a routine stop, probably. Amara signaled and pulled over to the shoulder of the road, turning down her music and reaching for her license and registration in the glove compartment. Officer James Mercer watched Amara's sedan for a moment before stepping out of his patrol car. He'd been on shift for 10 hours already, and his mood had soured with each passing hour. As he approached her window, his hand rested casually on his holster, a habit formed over his 12 years on the force. "License and registration," he said flatly, not bothering with the customary greeting. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Amara. "Good afternoon, officer," Amara said, her voice steady and polite as she handed over her documents. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Officer Mercer glanced at her license, then back at her face. "You were going 5 over the limit and your right taillight looks like it might be out." Amara frowned slightly. She was certain she'd been driving at the speed limit, and she'd just had her car serviced last week. Everything had been in working order. "I'm sorry about that, officer. I wasn't aware of any issues with my taillight. I'll get it checked right away." Something in her tone seemed to irritate Mercer. His jaw tightened. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The request caught Amara off guard. "Excuse me? Is there a problem, officer?" "I said step out of the vehicle now." His voice hardened, his hand gripping his holster more firmly. Amara felt her heart beat faster, but she remained calm. "Officer, I don't understand why I need to exit my car for a minor traffic violation." "Could you please explain?" "I'm not going to ask again," Mercer snapped, his face flushing with anger. He reached for the door handle himself and yanked it open. "Out now." Across the street, a couple walking their dog slowed down, watching the scene unfold with concern. The woman pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly. "Officer, I'm complying, but I'd like to understand what's happening," Amara said, carefully unbuckling her seatbelt. She was trying to keep her voice level, though fear was building in her chest. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Always stay calm, always be respectful no matter what." As Amara began to step out, Officer Mercer grabbed her arm roughly. "You people always think you know better, don't you?" The words stung like a slap. "Excuse me," Amara said, unable to hide her shock. "You heard me," Mercer growled, tightening his grip on her arm. "I bet Daddy bought you this nice car, huh? Think you own the road?" Amara winced at the pain in her arm. "Officer, you're hurting me. I've done nothing wrong. Please let go of my arm." By now, several more people had stopped to watch. A man in a business suit had also taken out his phone and was recording. A teenage boy called out, "Hey, leave her alone. She didn't do anything." Mercer's head whipped around at the voice. "Stay back," he shouted before turning back to Amara. His face was inches from hers now. "You bringing an audience? Think that'll help you?" "I didn't," Amara began, but before she could finish, Mercer yanked her forward, causing her to stumble out of the car. As she tried to regain her balance, he twisted her arm behind her back. Pain shot through Amara's shoulder. "Please stop." "You're hurting me," she cried out, tears springing to her eyes. "Stop resisting," Mercer shouted, though Amara had done no such thing. "I'm not resisting," she insisted, her voice breaking with fear. The growing crowd began to protest louder. Someone shouted they were calling 911. The tension in the air was palpable, electric with fear and anger. Something in Mercer seemed to snap. With one violent motion, he shoved Amara against the side of her car. She lost her footing on the uneven shoulder of the road and fell hard, her head striking the pavement with a sickening sound. As she lay stunned, Mercer loomed over her. "These uppity ones always cause the most trouble," he muttered, just loud enough for the closest bystanders to hear. "Know your place next time." The racial slur that followed hung in the air like poison. Time seemed to slow for Amara as she lay on the ground. The pain in her wrist was blinding. She could tell something was broken. Her vision swam and she tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue during the fall. She could hear shouting around her, but it sounded distant and muffled as if she were underwater. A woman knelt beside her. "Don't move, honey. An ambulance is coming. We all saw what happened. We're all witnesses." Through her haze, Amara saw Officer Mercer backing away, suddenly aware of the many phones pointed in his direction. His expression shifted from rage to something akin to panic as the reality of his actions began to sink in. Another police car arrived, lights flashing. An older officer stepped out, taking in the scene with a grim expression. He looked from Amara on the ground to Mercer, and then to the crowd of witnesses, many still recording. "What the hell happened here, Mercer?" the senior officer demanded. "She resisted arrest," Mercer said, but his voice lacked conviction. The damning evidence was already spreading across social media, the truth impossible to hide. As paramedics arrived and carefully placed Amara on a stretcher, one of the witnesses approached the senior officer. "I have the whole thing recorded," the man said firmly. "That woman did nothing wrong. He attacked her and called her terrible names." The paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing Amara's neck and assessing her injuries. "Possible concussion, definitely a broken wrist," one said to his partner. "BP's elevated. Let's get moving." Through waves of pain, Amara managed to speak. "My father. Please call my father. Judge William Johnson." The name caused a visible reaction among the officers present. Everyone in the county knew Judge Johnson, respected, fair, and powerful. The senior officer's face paled. He looked at Mercer with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You just assaulted a federal judge's daughter while using racial slurs? On camera?" Mercer stood frozen, the full weight of his actions beginning to crash down on him. As the ambulance doors closed, Amara closed her eyes against the pain and nausea. The image of her father's face came to mind. How would he react? The man who had spent his life upholding the law, who had warned her since childhood about being extra careful around police, who had fought so hard to change the system from within. How would he bear seeing his own daughter become another statistic, another victim? The news spread like wildfire. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the first video clips were already going viral. In them, Officer Mercer's face was clear, his words audible, his actions undeniable. The daughter of federal Judge William Johnson, a respected black woman with no criminal record, a healthcare worker who volunteered with underprivileged children on weekends, had been assaulted by a police officer during a routine traffic stop. As doctors examined her injuries, a concussion, a broken wrist, bruised ribs, and various cuts and scrapes, Amara drifted in and out of consciousness. In her more lucid moments, she wondered how a simple drive home had turned into this nightmare. She thought about the cases her father had presided over, about the stories of police brutality she'd heard all her life, about how she'd always believed that her education and status might somehow shield her. Now she knew better. Now she was living what so many others had experienced. And as the medication finally took effect and she slipped into uneasy sleep, one thought remained. This time, there were witnesses. This time there was irrefutable proof. This time, perhaps justice might actually be served. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first thing Amara heard as she drifted back to consciousness. Her eyelids felt heavy, and when she finally managed to open them, the bright hospital lights made her wince. She tried to lift her hand to shield her eyes, but felt a sharp pain shoot through her arm. Looking down, she saw her wrist wrapped in a cast, elevated on a pillow. "She's awake," a gentle voice said from somewhere to her left. Turning her head carefully, Amara saw her mother, Diane, rising from a chair beside the bed. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Behind her stood Amara's father, Judge William Johnson, his tall frame rigid with tension, his face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide the storm brewing beneath. "Water," Amara managed to croak, her throat dry and scratchy. Her mother quickly held a cup with a straw to her lips. "Small sips, baby. Take it slow." After drinking, Amara tried to sit up but immediately felt dizzy.
"How long have I been here?"
"About 5 hours," her father answered, his deep voice tight with controlled emotion. "You have a concussion, a broken wrist, 2 bruised ribs, and various cuts and bruises." He recited her injuries like he was reading a legal brief, but his hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. The events of the afternoon came rushing back, and Amara felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her concussion. "The officer, we know," her mother said softly, taking Amara's uninjured hand. "It's all over the news. People recorded everything. Judge Johnson moved closer to the bed, finally sitting on its edge. Up close, Amara could see the toll the last few hours had taken on him. Her father had always seemed ageless, strong, but right now he looked every one of his 62 years. "Daddy," she whispered, using the childhood name she'd long since outgrown. Tears welled in her eyes and she didn't try to stop them. "I did everything right, just like you always told me. I was polite. I didn't argue." "I know, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "I know." He reached out, hesitated, then gently stroked her hair, careful to avoid the bandage on her forehead. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." A knock on the door interrupted them. A doctor entered, followed by 2 police officers, one male, one female, both wearing solemn expressions. "I'm sorry to intrude," the female officer said. "I'm Lieutenant Rivera, and this is Captain Chen. We'd like to take Ms. Johnson's statement about what happened today, if she feels up to it." Judge Johnson stood, immediately shifting into his professional demeanor. "My daughter has a concussion. She needs rest." The doctor nodded in agreement. "I'd prefer if questioning could wait until tomorrow." Lieutenant Rivera's expression softened. "Of course, Your Honor. We understand completely." She turned to Amara. "Ms. Johnson, I want you to know that Officer Mercer has been suspended pending investigation. The videos clearly show he used excessive force and inappropriate language. We're taking this very seriously." "Suspended?" Judge Johnson's voice was dangerously quiet. "My daughter is lying in a hospital bed with broken bones because one of your officers assaulted her during a routine traffic stop while using racial slurs, and he's merely suspended?" Captain Chen stepped forward. "Sir, we understand your frustration, but there's a process we have to follow. That said, with the video evidence and witness statements, I assure you this is being fast-tracked. The chief wants to speak with you personally when you're available." The tension in the room was palpable. Amara watched her father struggle between his personal rage and his lifelong commitment to the legal system he served. "William," her mother said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Not now. Amara needs us." The reminder seemed to center him. He nodded curtly to the officers. "Tomorrow. We'll speak tomorrow." After they left, another knock came at the door. This time it was Ben, Amara's older brother, who rushed in looking frantic. A corporate attorney in New York, he must have caught the first flight after hearing the news. "Sis," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he took in her injuries. "I came as soon as I saw the videos. God, I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Videos?" Amara asked. "How many are there?" Ben hesitated, glancing at their parents. "They've gone viral. At least 3 different angles. Millions of views already." Amara closed her eyes, feeling suddenly exposed. Her trauma, her pain, her humiliation, all of it now public consumption. Strangers watching her most vulnerable moment again and again. "People are outraged," Ben continued, misreading her reaction. "There are protests forming outside police headquarters. Justice for Amara is trending nationwide, a hashtag." "She was a hashtag now. That's enough," her mother said firmly. "Amara needs rest." All this can wait, but Amara shook her head. "No, I want to know. What's happening out there?" Ben pulled up a chair. "The officer's name is James Mercer. People dug up his record. There have been complaints before, mostly from people of color. Always dismissed, but he picked the wrong person this time." He gave a grim smile. "Nobody messes with a Johnson and gets away with it." "This isn't about our name," Judge Johnson said sharply. "This would be just as wrong if it happened to anyone." "Of course it would," Ben agreed. "But you know as well as I do that without your position, this might have been brushed under the rug like all those other complaints." The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. Judge Johnson had spent decades working within the system, believing he could change it from the inside. Now his own daughter had become a victim of that same system. A soft knock interrupted them as a nurse entered to check Amara's vitals. "You have quite the crowd in the waiting room," she mentioned as she worked. "Friends, co-workers. Even some of the witnesses from the scene came to check on you. And reporters, though security is keeping them at bay." Amara felt a rush of gratitude, thinking of her friends and colleagues waiting to see her. Then another thought struck her. The people who recorded what happened, are they okay? The officer didn't go after them, did he? Her father shook his head. "They're fine. One of them is actually a law student who recognized me from guest lectures at the university. He called my office directly after the ambulance took you away. For the first time, Amara thought about how this must feel for her father, a federal judge known for his work on civil rights cases, now watching his own daughter become the very kind of victim he'd sought justice for throughout his career. "Daddy," she said softly, "what happens now?" Judge Johnson looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow, rage, and determination. Now we fight. But first," he added, his voice gentling, "you heal." Her mother nodded in agreement. "One step at a time, Amara. Right now you need to rest." As if on cue, Amara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The doctor had warned that with her concussion, fatigue would hit suddenly. "Stay?" she asked, already feeling her eyelids grow heavy. "We're not going anywhere," her mother assured her, settling back in the chair and taking her hand. As Amara drifted off to sleep, she could hear her father and brother talking in low, intense voices about lawyers, media statements, and next steps. Even in her foggy state, she recognized that her life had irrevocably changed. When she woke up, she would be facing not just her physical recovery, but also the harsh spotlight of public attention and the weight of symbolizing something much bigger than herself. In her dreams, Amara saw Officer Mercer's face twisted with anger. She felt again the shocking pain of her head hitting the pavement, but this time the dream shifted and she saw herself standing tall in a courtroom, her voice clear and strong as she spoke truth to power. Outside her hospital room, the city was already responding to what had happened. Social media blazed with outrage. News channels played the censored videos on repeat. Protesters gathered, their signs demanding justice. Phone lines at the police department rang continuously. And in a small apartment across town, Officer James Mercer sat alone, watching his entire career and possibly his freedom unravel as his actions played on every screen in America. The consequences he had avoided for so long were finally catching up to him. This time there would be no escaping accountability. Morning would bring reporters, lawyers, and police officials. It would bring painful questions and difficult decisions. But for now, surrounded by her family's love and protection, Amara slept, her body beginning the long process of healing from wounds both visible and hidden. 3 days after the incident, Amara sat on the edge of her childhood bed, looking out the window at the media vans still parked along her parents' quiet suburban street. She'd been discharged from the hospital yesterday, and her parents had insisted she stay with them rather than return to her empty apartment. Now dressed in loose-fitting clothes that wouldn't press against her bruised ribs, she watched reporters checking their phones and drinking coffee, waiting for something to happen. A soft knock on the door drew her attention. Her father entered carrying a mug of the ginger tea she'd always liked when she was sick as a child. "The vultures still out there?" he asked, setting the tea on her nightstand. Amara nodded, attempting a smile. "They're persistent, I'll give them that." Judge Johnson sat beside her with a sigh. In his hand, he held several folders. The police chief called. "They've completed the preliminary investigation into Officer Mercer." Amara's heart quickened. "Already?" That was fast. "The videos didn't leave much room for debate," her father said, his voice tight. "And they found some things when they started digging into his record." He opened the top folder and handed her several papers. "These are complaints filed against Mercer over the past 5 years. 7 in total, all from people of color, all dismissed for insufficient evidence." Amara scanned the documents, her stomach nodding as she read the accounts. A black teenager accused Mercer of planting drugs in his car. A Hispanic woman claimed he'd threatened her when she asked for his badge number. An Asian man reported that Mercer had used racial slurs during an arrest. "None of these went anywhere?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Her father shook his head grimly. "Internal Affairs claimed there wasn't enough proof. No witnesses, no video evidence, just their word against his. And a cop's word carries more weight," Amara said bitterly. "It did," her father agreed. "But things are different now." He took the papers back and closed the folder. "The chief wants to meet with us today. They're going to fire Mercer, and the district attorney is considering criminal charges." Amara looked down at her cast. The physical pain had dulled to a persistent ache, but whenever she closed her eyes, she could still feel the officer's hands gripping her arm, still hear his hateful words, still feel the sickening impact of her head hitting the pavement. "Will you come with me to the meeting?" her father asked gently. "You don't have to if you're not feeling up to it." Amara thought about hiding in her childhood bedroom, while others decided the consequences for the man who had hurt her. No, she wouldn't give Mercer that power over her. "I'll come," she said. I want to look the chief in the eye when he explains how a man with 7 complaints was still patrolling the streets with a badge and a gun. 2 hours later, Amara sat beside her father in Police Chief Thomas Rivera's office. Her mother and brother waited outside along with the family lawyer. Chief Rivera, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, looked uncomfortable as he explained the department's findings. Ms. Johnson, first let me say again how deeply sorry I am for what happened to you. Officer Mercer's actions were inexcusable, and they do not reflect the values of this department. Amara nodded but said nothing. She'd heard these practiced apologies on the news whenever police brutality made headlines. They rang hollow now that she was on the receiving end. We've conducted a thorough investigation, Chief Rivera continued. Between the video evidence, witness statements, and our review of Officer Mercer's record, we have more than enough cause to terminate his employment effective immediately. And the previous complaints? Amara asked quietly. The ones that were dismissed? Chief Rivera shifted in his seat. We're reopening those cases. It appears that he paused, choosing his words carefully. Procedural errors were made in the initial investigations. Procedural errors, Judge Johnson repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that euphemism. Chief, let's be frank. Your department systematically ignored multiple complaints against an officer with clear racial biases, and my daughter paid the price for that negligence. The chief had the decency to look ashamed. You're right, Your Honor. And that's why we're not just firing Mercer. We're implementing department-wide changes in how we handle citizen complaints, especially those involving potential bias. All officers will undergo additional training, and we're creating a civilian review board to provide oversight. Amara listened as the men discussed policy changes and accountability measures. It all sounded good, but would it actually make a difference? How many times had similar promises been made after similar incidents? What about criminal charges? She asked, interrupting their discussion. Both men turned to look at her. He broke my wrist. He gave me a concussion. He called me... Her voice faltered slightly. Terrible names. If I had done that to him, I'd be in jail right now. The DA is pursuing assault charges, Chief Rivera assured her. And with the video evidence clearly showing his use of racial slurs, they're adding a hate crime enhancement. Judge Johnson placed a supportive hand on Amara's shoulder. We'll be meeting with the district attorney this afternoon, he told the chief. I want to make sure this case is handled properly. As they stood to leave, Chief Rivera said, Ms. Johnson, I know this won't fix what happened to you, but I hope it's a start. Amara looked at him for a long moment. You know, all my life my father taught me to believe in the system, to trust that justice would prevail even if it took time. I'm still waiting to see if he was right. Outside, reporters surged forward as Amara and her father exited the police station. Her brother quickly moved to shield her while her mother took her arm, guiding her toward their waiting car. Amara, how do you feel about Officer Mercer being fired? Judge Johnson, will you be presiding over Mercer's trial? Are you planning to sue the police department? The questions flew at them from all directions. Amara kept her head down, letting her family create a protective barrier around her. But as they reached the car, one question cut through the noise. Ms. Johnson, do you think your father's position is the only reason this case is being taken seriously? Amara stopped, turning to face the young reporter who had asked the question. The woman looked barely older than a college student, her expression earnest as she held her microphone out. My name is on the news because of who my father is, Amara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But there are countless others who have experienced what I did, or worse, whose names you'll never know, whose stories you'll never tell because they don't have a federal judge for a father. She took a deep breath, suddenly aware that every camera was trained on her, that her words might be broadcast nationwide. What happened to me was wrong, but it would have been just as wrong if it happened to anyone else. The 7 people who filed complaints against Officer Mercer before me deserve to be taken seriously too. They deserve justice too. So if you want to report on something, report on that. With that, she turned and got into the car. As they drove away, her mother squeezed her hand. That was brave, she said softly. It was the truth, Amara replied, watching the police station recede in the rearview mirror. Later that evening, as the family sat in the living room watching Amara's impromptu statement play on the evening news, her brother whistled softly. Look at you, sis. You're trending again. People are sharing that clip everywhere. Amara's phone had been buzzing nonstop with notifications. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers were sending messages of support. The 7 previous complainants against Officer Mercer had reached out through their lawyers, thanking her for mentioning their cases. Her father muted the television and turned to her. "The district attorney wants you to testify at the preliminary hearing next week. You don't have to if you're not ready." Amara touched her still bandaged forehead gently. The physical wounds would heal, but she knew the invisible ones would take much longer. The fear when she saw police lights, the nightmares about hands grabbing her, the way she now flinched at sudden movements. "I'll testify," she said, "not just for me but for those 7 others too. And for anyone else who's been afraid to come forward because they didn't think they'd be believed." Her father looked at her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "When I became a judge, I hoped I could change things from the inside. Make the system fairer, more just. Sometimes I wonder if I've made any difference at all." "You have," Amara said, reaching for his hand. "But systems don't change overnight, and they don't change just because one person wants them to. They change when enough people demand it." She glanced back at the television, where footage now showed protesters gathering outside the police station, holding signs with her name and the names of others who had suffered similar fates. "Maybe this is how it starts," she said softly. "Not with me, but with all of us standing together and saying enough." As night fell, Amara's phone lit up with a new message. It was from a law school friend who now worked for a civil rights organization. "When you're ready to tell your story, we're ready to listen, and we're ready to help you fight." For the first time since the incident, Amara felt something like hope stirring inside her. This wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning. 2 weeks after the incident, Amara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to the fading yellowish bruise on her forehead. Today was the preliminary hearing for James Mercer, and she wanted to look strong, composed. The cast on her wrist made her movements awkward, but she'd gotten better at doing things one-handed. "You almost ready?" Her brother called from the hallway of her apartment. Ben had extended his stay, helping her move back home from their parents' house and taking time off work to support her through the legal proceedings. "Almost," she replied, taking a deep breath and studying her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes more watchful, her expression more guarded. The physical wounds were healing, but other changes ran deeper. In the kitchen, she found Ben making coffee, already dressed in a sharp suit. He'd been coordinating with the district attorney's office, putting his legal expertise to work for his sister's case. "Dad called," he said, handing her a mug. "He's meeting us at the courthouse. Mom's coming too, but she'll sit in the back. Thinks it'll be less intimidating for you if you don't have to worry about her reactions." Amara nodded, grateful for her mother's thoughtfulness. "Have you seen the news this morning?" Ben's expression turned grim. "Yeah. Mercer's union is making a statement talking about rush to judgment and trial by media. Standard playbook. And the counter-protests? Small but vocal. Some Blue Lives Matter folks, some people claiming it's all political because of Dad's position." He hesitated. "There's also been some backlash against you online. Trolls digging through your social media, trying to find something to discredit you." Amara sipped her coffee, unsurprised. "Let me guess. They're saying I must have done something to provoke him, that there must be more to the story." "Something like that," Ben admitted. "But for every troll, there are hundreds supporting you." The 7 other complainants against Mercer have been especially vocal. "You gave them a platform they never had before." The ride to the courthouse was tense and quiet. As they approached, Amara saw the crowd gathered on the steps. Reporters with cameras, protesters with signs, curious onlookers hoping to witness a piece of the drama. A separate entrance had been arranged for her, but she shook her head when Ben tried to guide her toward it. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not sneaking in the back. I have nothing to hide." With Ben at her side and a court officer clearing the way, Amara walked up the main steps of the courthouse. Cameras flashed around her and she heard her name called from multiple directions. But she kept her eyes forward, her pace steady. Inside, she found her father waiting in a small conference room with the district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Lee. "Ms. Johnson," Lee greeted her, extending a hand. "Thank you for being here today. I know this isn't easy." "Call me Amara, please," she replied, shaking the woman's hand. "And thank you for taking the case seriously. With the evidence we have, it would be malpractice not to," Lee said. She turned to a folder on the table. "Officer Mercer has been charged with assault, battery, and civil rights violations with a hate crime enhancement." Today is just the preliminary hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial, which there absolutely is. You'll need to testify briefly about what happened, and the defense will have limited opportunity for cross-examination. Amara nodded. She'd been preparing for this, mentally rehearsing her account of that day. What about the other complaints? She asked. The ones that were dismissed? Lee's expression was carefully neutral. We're looking into them. The fact pattern shows striking similarities to your case. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, it strengthens our position. Judge Johnson, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Will any of those complainants be in court today? All 7 have indicated they plan to attend, Lee confirmed. They want to show support. A court officer knocked on the door. They're ready for you, Ms. Johnson. The courtroom fell silent as Amara entered. She kept her eyes straight ahead, not wanting to see Mercer yet. She took her seat at the witness stand, and only then did she allow herself to look at the man who had hurt her. James Mercer sat beside his attorney, wearing a suit that seemed slightly too big for him. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than he had that day on the roadside. When their eyes met briefly, he quickly looked away. Testifying was both easier and harder than Amara had expected. Easier because the facts were clear, documented in video that had already been entered into evidence. Harder because reliving the experience brought back the fear, the pain, the humiliation. Her voice shook at times, but she pushed through, describing each moment with careful precision. And did Officer Mercer say anything to you during this encounter that you found particularly disturbing? The prosecutor asked. Amara swallowed hard. Yes. When he pushed me to the ground, he said, "These uppity ones always cause the most trouble." Then he used a racial slur that I'd prefer not to repeat in court. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I understand that's difficult to discuss. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, the video evidence includes audio of these statements, which we've submitted as Exhibit C. Mercer's defense attorney, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and an air of confidence, approached for cross-examination. Ms. Johnson, first let me say I'm sorry for what you experienced. He began, his voice smoothly sympathetic. I just have a few questions to clarify the sequence of events. What followed was a careful attempt to suggest that perhaps Amara had misunderstood Mercer's intentions, that perhaps she had made movements that could have been interpreted as resistance, that perhaps the officer's words had been misheard in the heat of the moment. Amara kept her composure, referring back to the video evidence whenever possible. The footage shows exactly what happened, she said firmly. I didn't resist. I didn't provoke. I simply asked why I was being ordered out of my car for a minor traffic stop. When she was finally excused from the witness stand, Amara felt drained. She moved to sit beside her father in the gallery, accepting his supportive arm around her shoulders. As the hearing continued, expert witnesses testified about her injuries. Technology experts verified the authenticity of the videos, and character witnesses spoke about her reputation and standing in the community. Throughout it all, Amara found herself drawn to a section of the courtroom where 7 people sat together, the previous complainants against Officer Mercer. They were diverse in age and appearance, united only by their shared experience of mistreatment and dismissal. One woman caught Amara's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of solidarity that brought tears to Amara's eyes. During a brief recess, the district attorney approached Amara in the hallway. The judge will almost certainly find probable cause to proceed to trial, she said quietly. But Mercer's attorney has indicated they might be open to a plea deal. Amara frowned. What kind of deal? He pleads guilty to lesser charges, serves some time but not the maximum. It would spare you a full trial, which could get ugly. His defense team will try to put you on trial instead of him. Your character, your behavior, your family's influence. Ben, who had joined them, looked concerned. They'd try to paint this as political because of Dad's position. Lee nodded. It's their best angle of attack. Not very strong given the evidence, but it could drag things out, make it more painful for Amara. What do you think I should do? Amara asked. That's entirely your decision, Lee said. A plea means guaranteed consequences, but possibly less severe ones. A trial means uncertainty, more publicity, more stress for you, but potentially a stronger message if he's convicted on all counts. As they returned to the courtroom, Amara noticed a group of police officers sitting together in the back row. not in uniform but unmistakable in their bearing and the way they watched the proceedings. Were they there to support Mercer? To observe? To send a message? One officer, an older black man, caught her looking and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It took her a moment to recognize him. He'd been at the scene after Mercer had pushed her down, one of the first responding officers who'd called the ambulance. His presence complicated the narrative of us versus them that had been forming in her mind. When the judge finally ruled that there was indeed probable cause to proceed to trial, setting a date 6 weeks away, Amara felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. This was just the beginning of a longer journey. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. The district attorney gave a brief, factual summary of the proceedings. Mercer's attorney spoke about his client's years of service and the dangers of rushing to judgment. When the microphones turned to Amara, she hesitated, then stepped forward. "Today was difficult," she said simply, "but what happened to me is happening to others every day, without cameras to record it, without a judge for a father, without the public attention my case has received. If there's any purpose to my pain, let it be this: that we finally listen to those voices that have been silenced for too long." As she walked away, she felt her phone buzz with an incoming message. It was from a reporter at a national news program, asking for an exclusive interview. Another message followed from the civil rights organization her friend worked for, wanting to discuss a potential leadership role in their police accountability initiative. The world was opening up in unexpected ways, offering her platforms she'd never sought, responsibilities she'd never imagined. As she left the courthouse surrounded by her family, Amara realized that the path forward wasn't just about her personal healing or even justice for her case alone. It was about something larger, something that had begun the moment Officer Mercer had pulled her over, something that would continue long after his case was resolved. She thought of the 7 faces in the courtroom, of the officer who had nodded to her, of the protesters outside with their signs. This story was bigger than just her now, and somehow in the midst of all her pain and fear, she had become its voice. 6 months had passed since the day Amara's life had changed forever. The morning was crisp and clear as she stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The physical reminders of her encounter with Officer Mercer had faded, the cast on her wrist long gone, the bruises healed, though she still occasionally felt pain when the weather changed. The invisible scars ran deeper, emerging in unexpected moments. A surge of anxiety when she saw police lights in her rearview mirror, the way she now automatically scanned for exits whenever she entered a new space. Today would bring its own challenges. She was scheduled to testify at a state legislative hearing on a police reform bill that had been named partly in her honor, the Johnson-Reynolds Accountability Act. Reynolds, for Anthony Reynolds, a teenager who had died in police custody 3 years earlier. His mother had become one of Amara's closest allies in the months since her own incident. "You ready for this?" her father asked, appearing in the doorway of the guest room where Amara had spent the night. She'd moved back to her own apartment months ago, but had stayed over to prepare for today's testimony with her father's help. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking a deep breath. "Did you see the morning news?" Judge Johnson nodded, his expression solemn. "Protesters on both sides already gathering at the Capitol. Security's been increased." The polarization around the bill had intensified in recent weeks. While polls showed strong public support, police unions and their allies had mounted an aggressive campaign against it, painting it as anti-police rather than pro-accountability. "How's Mom handling all this?" Amara asked as they headed downstairs. "Worried about you as always," her father said with a small smile. Proud too, though she'd never admit how proud. In the kitchen, Diane Johnson was packing a small cooler with water bottles and snacks. "The hearing could run long," she explained, not looking up. "You need to stay hydrated, keep your blood sugar steady." Amara exchanged an amused glance with her father. Some things never changed. No matter what historic testimony she might be giving, her mother still treated her like she was heading off to a middle school field trip. "Any word from Ben?" she asked, accepting a travel mug of coffee from her mother. "He's meeting us there," her father replied, "flying in this morning from New York." Her brother had returned to his corporate law practice after Mercer's trial, but had been instrumental in drafting key provisions of the bill now under consideration. The family had become an unexpected force for change, each contributing in their own way. The drive to the state capitol was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. For Amara, the past 6 months played through her mind like scenes from someone else's life. Mercer's trial had ended with a guilty verdict on all counts, resulting in a 7-year sentence. The police department had implemented sweeping changes, including a civilian review board with actual authority. The 7 previous complaints against Mercer had been reopened, with settlements offered to those who had been mistreated. And Amara herself had become something she'd never expected. A reluctant symbol, a voice for those who hadn't been heard. She'd taken a leave of absence from her job at the health clinic to work with the civil rights organization her friend had introduced her to. The toll had been high: death threats, online harassment, the loss of privacy, but the work felt necessary, important. As they approached the Capitol building, Amara could see the crowds gathered on the steps. Signs waved above heads, some supporting the bill, others opposing it. Police officers formed a line, keeping the groups separate. Seeing them in their uniforms, Amara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the quickening of her pulse. She closed her eyes briefly, using the breathing techniques her therapist had taught her. "We can use the side entrance," her father suggested, noting her reaction. Amara shook her head. "No, I won't hide." They parked and made their way toward the main steps. As they approached, someone in the crowd spotted them. "That's her." "That's Amara Johnson." A path cleared before them as people turned to look. Some reached out, trying to touch her arm or shoulder as she passed. Others called out words of support. From the opposing side came boos and hostile shouts, but they seemed distant, muffled by the supportive crowd surrounding her family. Inside, they found Ben waiting in the hearing room, reviewing his notes one last time. He embraced his sister tightly. "You've got this," he whispered in her ear. The room was already packed: legislators, media, interested citizens. In the front row sat Teresa Reynolds, Anthony's mother, who gave Amara a small nod of encouragement. Beside her were several of the people who had filed complaints against Mercer before Amara's incident. They had become an unofficial support group over the months, sharing their stories, their pain, their hope for change. As the hearing began, Amara listened to expert testimony from civil liberties attorneys, law enforcement officials both supporting and opposing the bill, community activists, and academics. Finally, it was her turn to speak. She approached the microphone, setting her prepared statement on the podium before her. Looking out at the faces watching her, some sympathetic, others skeptical, many simply curious, she suddenly set the paper aside. The carefully crafted words her father had helped her polish seemed inadequate now, too formal for what she needed to say. "6 months ago," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I was driving home from work when I was pulled over by Officer James Mercer. What should have been a routine traffic stop ended with me in the hospital with a broken wrist. A concussion and a changed life," she paused, looking directly at the committee members. "You've seen the videos. You know what happened to me. But what you might not know is that before me, there were 7 others who filed complaints against Officer Mercer. 7 others whose voices weren't heard because there weren't videos, because they didn't have a father who was a federal judge, because the system wasn't designed to listen to them." Amara gestured toward the people sitting in the front row. "These are some of those people. They're here today not just for themselves or for me, but for all the others who have suffered similar fates and remained silent because they believed speaking up wouldn't matter." She took a deep breath. "This bill isn't about punishing police officers. It's about creating a system where good officers can thrive and those who abuse their power can be held accountable. It's about making sure that what happened to me, and to Anthony Reynolds, and to countless others, stops happening." For the next 10 minutes, Amara spoke from the heart, detailing not just her own experience but the larger patterns it represented. She talked about the fear that had become her constant companion, about the letters she'd received from others sharing similar stories, about her hope that her pain might lead to meaningful change. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment before erupting into applause from supporters. Even some who had come to oppose the bill seemed moved by her words. The questioning that followed was sometimes supportive, sometimes combative. One legislator implied that her case was getting special treatment because of her father's position. Another suggested that she was being used as a pawn by anti-police activists. Through it all, Amara remained composed, answering honestly, refusing to be provoked. When asked if she hated the police, she shook her head. I don't hate police officers. I know many of them are good people trying to do a difficult job. What I hate is a system that protects the bad ones at the expense of both the public and the good officers. This bill isn't anti-police, it's pro-justice. Hours later, exhausted but satisfied, Amara stood with her family in the Capitol rotunda. The hearing had ended with the committee voting to advance the bill to the full legislature. A significant victory, though the fight was far from over. As reporters clamored for statements and supporters offered congratulations, Amara spotted a familiar face at the edge of the crowd, the older black officer who had nodded to her during Mercer's hearing. He was in uniform now, standing slightly apart from the activity. Excusing herself, she walked over to him. Officer Powell, she said, reading his nameplate. You were there that day, weren't you? After it happened, he nodded, his expression solemn. I was. Called the ambulance for you. Thank you for that, she said simply, and thank you for being here today. I've been on the force 30 years, Ms. Johnson, he said quietly. Seen a lot of changes, good and bad. We need this bill, more than some of my colleagues want to admit. Amara studied him. This man who represented the complexity of the issues she now fought for. An officer who wanted accountability as much as she did. Would you be willing to speak publicly about that? She asked. It would mean a lot coming from someone inside the department. Officer Powell hesitated, then gave a small nod. I retire next month. After that, yes, I think I would. As they exchanged contact information, Amara felt a sense of cautious hope. Change was never simple or straightforward. It came in small steps, in unexpected allies, in painful moments that somehow led to better ones. Later that evening, as her family celebrated with a quiet dinner at home, Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. The governor had just issued a statement supporting the bill, significantly increasing its chances of becoming law. Her father raised his glass in a toast. To justice, he said. Slow, imperfect, but possible. To healing, her mother added. To change, Ben contributed. Amara lifted her own glass, thinking of all the people who had become part of her journey, Teresa Reynolds and her lost son, the 7 who had complained before her, Officer Powell and his quiet courage, the countless others who had shared their stories after seeing hers. To all of us, she said, every voice that refused to be silenced. Outside, the sun was setting on one day and would rise on another. The work wasn't done, might never be done in her lifetime. But watching her family's faces in the gentle light, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished together, Amara knew with certainty that her painful journey had meaning, that her voice had power, and that some broken things once shattered could be rebuilt into something stronger than before.